It's been a little over 5 years since I first tested the RTX 3060 Ti, and it's also a little over 5 years since I started this YouTube channel. In fact, this was actually the very first graphics card I ever reviewed, back when it was brand new and still made some financial sense, at least on paper. 2026 therefore seemed like the perfect time to take a retrospective look at whether, after 5 years of the rollercoaster world of PC hardware, it's still worth it. I'm referring to the graphics card, of course. Why? What else would I be talking about? This video was sponsored by Bellroy. The Transit Work Pack is my new daily driver, made out of tough DuraWeave material with coated YKK zippers, inverted to prevent water ingress and keep your laptop, gadgets and other daily essentials nice and dry, even in the British summertime. Seriously, I used to sell professional camera bags that had these zippers and I used to geek out about them. The Transit is available in either 20 or 26 litre capacities in a range of subtle, stylish colours. Or orange, if you just want to steal tech dweeb's identity. Bellroy sells a range of accessories, from shoulder bags, totes and travel luggage, to smaller accessories like wallets and watch straps, and this tech compact for storing things like phone chargers, batteries and USB cables. Use my link below for 10% off anything in store. The standard operating procedure for a noob starting out on the technology side of YouTube is to review what you've already got. As my channel was about PC gaming hardware, that meant the most logical choice for my first review was the Founders Edition RTX 3060 Ti I'd managed to bag for MSRP back in late 2020. And yes, that is a brag. The RTX 30 series launch coincided with the beginning of the scalper pandemic, a roughly 3-year period in which new stock was virtually unobtainium, and anyone with a graphics card to sell was essentially obliged to charge a premium price for it. In that environment, I tried my best to make a video that was useful to a prospective audience. My take on the unicorn that was the RTX 3060 Ti in late 2020 was: is it worth waiting for? It's now 2026. Both the 30 series and the scalper pandemic are far back in the rearview mirror, and after about 5 minutes of relative stability, the rollercoaster has started to drop once again. Graphics cards, especially 8GB ones, aren't that hard to get anymore. However, the general perception is that 8GB cards don't have much of a future ahead of them. The DLSS upscaler, that represented one of the 2 major selling points for RTX, continues to improve, but the 30 series doesn't get to enjoy all of the benefits. DLSS frame generation was a 40 series feature that hasn't been backported to older models yet, and likely never will. Memory supply issues, skyrocketing RAM and storage prices, and nothing but bad news from the gaming industry means that enthusiasm for PC tech is in the gutter. So, I guess nothing's changed. PC tech is in crisis, just like it was 5 years ago. It's really just the specifics that have changed. In 2021, I found my audience by panning for old gold, graphics cards and later CPUs that had enough performance and value to help survive the scalper pandemic. Now, I guess it makes sense to do the same thing once again, except the focus this time is on surviving Ramageddon, and that means making the best of what's available. We might not like that we're still considering 8GB cards as viable solutions when new games clearly expect more than this, but there aren't a lot of alternatives. The RTX 3060 Ti is up against modern 8GB GPUs like the RTX 5060, which is in the region of 15% more powerful on paper. At the time of recording, the 3060 Ti is selling on eBay UK for around £180 to £200, about £80 to £100 cheaper than the new model, and considering the warranty and peace of mind that comes from the new card, not to mention the debatably appealing frame gen feature that's missing from older models, the 3060 Ti has an uphill struggle ahead of it. That being said, perhaps you already have one, or can get one for a bargain price, and are weighing it up against spending more on a 5060. This time, the question isn't, is it worth waiting for, but rather, is it worth holding on to? As a Brit, the James Bond movie franchise is part of my DNA. Ordinarily, I hate nostalgia bait, and I don't really watch Bond movies anymore except perhaps Casino Royale every now and again, but IO Interactive are a unique voice in the gaming landscape, and their games always stand apart, so of course I had to test 007 First Light. The 3060 Ti can deliver a very playable native 1080p high experience with DLAA, averaging 59 FPS with lows of 44. The 5060 is a bit more performant, averaging 68 at the same settings, not even 69. Sad. Forza Horizon 6's built-in benchmark offers a worst-case scenario, with lots of cars on screen at once, so the average performance is perhaps a little lower than you might see in-game, at least unless you never win any races, which in a Forza Horizon game seems highly unlikely. In the benchmark, the 3060 Ti can manage the high RT preset at 63 FPS on average, with 1% lows of 56. The 5060 is barely 5% faster at these settings, but in fairness, my test result in actual gameplay was significantly higher. Among the handful of games I benchmarked in that old 2020 video was Resident Evil 3 Remake, so the fact that RE Requiem is still new enough to be relevant for this video is a stroke of luck really. There's enough performance in the 3060 Ti to achieve a 60 plus experience, not only in rasterized rendering, but even with some amount of RT. At 1080p normal, the Ampere card averages 87 FPS in the test scene, with lows of 62. Enabling normal RT drops the average to around 64, with lows of 52, which is still perfectly playable. The 5060 does quite a lot better, however, gaining roughly 17% in both use cases. Unfortunately, neither card has room to go any higher than this, as, like most RE Engine games, higher settings require more VRAM than we have here. Crimson Desert shows a clear advantage to the newer card in pretty much every use case. The 3060 Ti can't hit a 60 average even at the low preset with zero ray tracing, and with a 53 average and 44 1% lows, it's not quite a guaranteed 50. The 5060 meanwhile reaches 70 FPS on average and lows of 55. If you're willing to forgo frame rates to get graphics that don't suck, the 3060i can hit a rock-solid 30 FPS at 1080p high with ray tracing, averaging 43 with lows of 35. Meanwhile, the 5060 continues to dominate, but still falls a little short of 60 FPS. Ray reconstruction, which some people would argue is a necessity for this game due to the heavy noise, is too much for both cards. The 3060 Ti is barely playable at 17 FPS, while the 5060 is just about tolerable at a cinematic 24. A small amount of DLSS might help the 5060, but the 3060 would need more upscaling than I think is worth it. Just play without RR and learn to live with the noise. Death Stranding 2 continues to be pretty impressive in terms of performance, even on older hardware like this. There's still a limit to how high we can go thanks to the 8GB frame buffer, but 1080p high delivers a very smooth 65 FPS and looks fantastic. The 5060 once more wins in terms of strict benchmarks, averaging around 17% higher than the 3060 Ti, but both cards offer what I'd call an acceptable experience that I think most people would struggle to tell apart. Fatekeeper is in early access, so I'm kind of hesitant to mention it as there's no guarantee it'll ever be finished, or that my benchmarks will be valid if and when it is. As of June 2026, the game states that it needs a 3070 as both the minimum and recommended GPU, and the 3060 Ti isn't a million miles off from the 3070. In open country, performance is generally fine at 1080p high settings, but once I came to a more intensive area, the frame rate was driven down into the 50s, so calling it a 75 FPS average seems kinda disingenuous. My first test run also resulted in this persistent stutter as I moved through the world, and I had to restart the test run to resolve it. I mention this because when it came to testing the 5060, it showed the same problem, but it never went away. Not on the second run, not on the fourth. I didn't have time to experiment to see how best to fix it, and given that it's still in active development, it may be that this is a bug that devs are working on, so I wouldn't write these cards off just yet. The first KCD has never really featured on my channel before, but the sequel has been well received by audiences and critics, and benchmarkers love Kingdom Come Deliverance too, cause it's a counterpoint to the narrative that modern games are unnecessarily hard to run. It also offers a quick and easy way to tell how much of an impact the DLSS 4.5 transformer model has on the two architectures. The 3060 Ti can manage 1080p high at 71.8 FPS using the legacy model, and Transformer only drops that by less than 5%. Meanwhile, the 5060 actually sees a marginally higher drop, but it's starting from a much higher level. The newer card is over 50% faster than the 3060 Ti, and is still over 100 FPS, even with the Transformer model. Of course, both cards are using DLAA, as they're way too performant to require DLSS here. If, however, you wanted to play at 1440p with DLSS quality, I think you'd be safe using the Transformer model for either card. About 3 years ago, the PC port of the first The Last of Us marked the beginning of a new, problematic era in PC gaming. 8GB cards were no longer enough, even on an otherwise perfectly cromulent graphics card. Thankfully, Nixies did a remarkably good job with The Last of Us Part 2, and aside from still being overly heavy on VRAM and CPU usage, it generally performs pretty well. I did originally test both cards at very high, but the 5060 had performance issues in this clearing, and I've seen this before with other 8GB cards, so it's probably only a matter of time before the same thing happens to the 3060 Ti. Dropping to high with legacy DLAA sees the older card averaging 87 FPS, while the new card is just a hair short of the big 100. Once again, the Transformer model has scarcely any noticeable impact on performance, but I should remind you that this game is unusually CPU demanding, probably because of the squirrels, and so these kinds of FPS are actually in the splash zone for a CPU bottleneck. Most modern chips should be fine, but a 3000 series Ryzen 5, 10 series i5 or lower might not be able to achieve these kinds of frame rates. Arc Raiders is my current favourite online title to test GPUs and CPUs with, even if it's frankly a bit boring after a while. It's a UE5 game, and a surprisingly decent performer at that, and both cards can handle 1080p high with ray tracing. The 3060 Ti falls just short of 100 FPS, averaging 95 with dips as low as 60, whereas the 5060 reaches 116 with lows of 71. Again, these frame rates are not going to be achievable with every CPU out there, and an older platform might not see any performance difference between these GPUs at all. Once again, the CPU could be a factor in these results from Battlefield 6. I'm sure those of you thinking about dropping a couple of $100s on a second-hand graphics card probably aren't pairing it with an X3D chip or something with DDR5, so again, these gains aren't going to benefit everyone. That being said, without a noticeable CPU limit, the 5060 only beats the 3060 Ti by about 15%, averaging just under 140 next to the older GPU's 120. When I started out on YouTube, I set myself a few rules. One was to avoid making pointless intros, one was to avoid begging for likes, and one was to avoid benchmarking GTA 5. Obviously, I haven't stuck to these rules 100% of the time. Like everyone else in this niche, I've failed to resist the allure of Los Santos on many occasions, and last year's Enhanced Edition only legitimised my failure. Either of these cards would be a monster by the standards of the original game. I remember testing it on a 2060 and hitting 4K 60 most of the time. This new version has a few more graphical bells and whistles, most notably ray tracing, and the 3060 Ti can actually handle it. At 1080p maximum RT, the game averages 80 FPS with lows a little under the 60 mark. The 5060 gains an extra 15% on average and doesn't drop below 60, but both are extremely playable. I said earlier that I hate nostalgia bait, and I don't want to be someone who makes it for other people. The RTX 3060 Ti has a special place in my channel's history, but I don't want to look at it through rose-tinted spectacles, which is why I focus on testing newer games. From that perspective, it's a competent GPU. It's surprisingly competitive with the 5060, and I dare say in some instances it might be better than something like a 5050 or an Arc B570. If you live in a market where this is significantly cheaper and more accessible than a new model, it's a very compelling purchase. If you're stuck with an older PC, your CPU might not be powerful enough to see higher frame rates in all games, or the 5060's 8-lane PCI Express interface might be a bottleneck, so the 3060 Ti could actually equal or even beat the newer card. And if you only play older and lighter weight games, this thing's going to be an absolute beast. There are still plenty of good reasons to hold on to the 3060 Ti, even more than 5 years later. However, I don't want to ignore the benefits of the 5060. Aside from getting a brand new product with a warranty and clean fans and fresh TIM, you also benefit from better efficiency, longer driver support, and, dare I say it, frame generation. In fact, I've been working on a frame gen video on my second channel for what feels like months now. Actually, no, it has been months. I'm very behind schedule and it's taking forever to edit, but hopefully that video will be up a few days after this one. Spoiler, I don't actually hate it. Thanks to Bellroy for sponsoring this video. Use my link below for 10% off the Transit Work Pack or anything else in store. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.